All right, let's dive into the War of 1812. You know, it's this conflict that kind of gets lost between the American Revolution and the Civil War. But this war didn't just happen overnight. It wasn't one single event. It was more like a slow burn, fueled by decades of simmering tensions, with the massive Napoleonic Wars in Europe being the final thing to just throw gasoline on the fire. So that really brings us to the core question here. Why? I mean, why on earth would the young, scrappy United States decide to declare war on the biggest superpower in the world for a second time, just 29 years after winning its freedom? Well, as we're about to see, the answer is way more complicated than you might think. To really get this war, we have to rewind the clock. We've got to go back to the peace treaty that ended the last one. The 1783 Treaty of Paris was supposed to end the American Revolution for good, but honestly, its flaws planted the seeds for the next conflict almost right away. I mean, this treaty was basically a masterclass in kicking the can down the road. It left the US-Canada border super vague, it didn't really define any trade rights between the two, and get this, neither side actually paid its war debts. On top of all that, American states just kept illegally grabbing property from British loyalists. So this wasn't exactly a solid foundation for peace. It was a recipe for pure resentment. So Britain wasn't just gonna take that lying down. They retaliated by refusing to leave 8 of their military forts on U.S. soil. From these forts, they messed with American shipping and, this is a huge one, they started supporting Native American tribes who were pushing back against American expansion to the west. The message was pretty darn clear. Britain might have lost the war, but it had no intention of actually leaving North America.
For a while, all these tensions were just simmering under the surface. But then, war absolutely exploded over in Europe between Britain and Napoleonic France. And this massive global fight turned the Atlantic Ocean into a complete battleground, with American ships caught right in the middle of the crossfire.
And that brings us to one of the biggest causes of the war, a practice called impressment. The British Royal Navy was desperate for sailors, so they started doing something pretty outrageous, stopping ships on the high seas, including American ships, and just forcing sailors into their military service. Let's call it what it was. It was basically legalized kidnapping. This whole crisis really boiled down to a legal standoff. You see, British law was simple. Once a Brit, always a Brit. But American law allowed people to become naturalized citizens. So you'd have the Royal Navy board an American ship, find some sailor who was born in, say, London, and claim him as their own, even if he was now a proud U.S. citizen. For America, this was a massive violation of its rights as a country. And this wasn't a small problem. It was a huge problem. At the time, the U.S. Treasury Secretary Albert Gallatin estimated that half, literally half of America's merchant sailors were technically British subjects. That one fact alone explains why the Royal Navy was so aggressive and why American ships were such tempting targets. So for years, this whole impressment thing was a policy, a real headache. But in 1807, it turned into a violent, undeniable attack on the United States itself. This moment was called the Chesapeake Affair, and it was like pouring gasoline on an already raging fire. Okay, so picture this. It's June 22nd, 1807. An American warship, the USS Chesapeake, is just sailing off the coast of Virginia. Its decks are cluttered. It's totally unprepared for a fight. And then suddenly it's confronted by a British warship, the HMS Leopard, and they have a demand. The American captain refused to let the British search his ship for deserters. The Leopard's response? They just opened fire, blasting the American warship. Then they boarded the crippled ship and seized 4 sailors, claiming they were British deserters. This wasn't just impressment anymore. This was a direct military attack on the U.S. Navy. And the human cost was immediate and brutal. 3 American sailors were killed, 18 more were wounded, and all of this happened within sight of their own coastline. Suddenly, this abstract political issue had a very real and very bloody price. As you can imagine, outrage just exploded across the United States. And this quote really captures how people felt. It wasn't just an attack. It was a deep, profound insult. It felt like the British didn't see America as a real independent nation, but as some rebellious colony that could just be bullied whenever they felt like it. So how did America fight back? Not with its tiny military, but with its wallet. Totally outraged by the Chesapeake Affair and Britain's restrictive trade policies, the U.S. passed a total trade embargo. The idea was to starve Britain and France of American goods and force them to respect American ships. But oh man, did it backfire.
The plan completely forgot that the young American economy was way more dependent on British trade than the other way around. The result? It was a total disaster that plunged the U.S. into a depression while barely even scratching Britain and France. So, with diplomacy failing and economic warfare a complete bust, a new generation of politicians started rising up in Washington, and they were tired of the insults, tired of inaction. They became known as the war hawks, and they were demanding a military solution.
So what was their deal? What was driving them? Well, it was a few things. First, pure and simple, they wanted to defend America's national honor. Second, they wanted to put a stop to the British arming Native American groups, like the powerful Confederacy led by the charismatic Shawnee leader Tecumseh. And third, they had a really bold ambition: invade and annex Canada and get the British off the continent for good. The pressure from these warhawks just grew and grew until it was overwhelming. The stage was set for a final, fateful decision. And this is where the story takes a turn that is just defined by an incredible, almost tragic sense of bad timing. On June 1st, 1812, President James Madison sent a message to Congress. In it, he laid out every single grievance we've just talked about: the ship seizures, the forced service of sailors, the stirring up of trouble on the frontier. He didn't come right out and say, "Declare war," but everyone knew exactly what he meant. And here it is. This is the ultimate irony of the whole thing. On June 18th, Congress officially declared war on Great Britain. But what they couldn't possibly know, in an age of slow-sailing ships, was that just 2 days earlier, the British government had actually suspended those hostile trade policies that were a main reason for the war in the first place. I mean, somewhere out on the Atlantic, the ship carrying the news of peace literally passed the ship carrying the declaration of war. And that just leaves us with this incredible, fascinating, and kind of tragic question. Was this a necessary war fought for American honor and sovereignty? Or was it just a massive, bloody conflict caused by bad timing and slow communication? Think about it. Could this entire war, all the death and destruction, have been avoided by just a single, faster ship? That's a question history leaves for us to ponder.